Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Rosen Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chawla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. A lot's going on, but again, geopolitics still remains center stage in markets right now. And today we want to do a bit of an overview of the key things going on. Top of everyone's mind last week, a deal was reached on the US debt ceiling after a lot of political brinkmanship between two increasingly polarized political parties. Brunello, tell me more about how that came about and what the impact of that might be.
Yeah, so the point of this week's newsletter for podcast is showing that some very important financial events have occurred, something that would have moved the market significantly in the last few years. But now geopolitics reigns supreme and has a direct impact on markets. So from a pure macro-financial standpoint, there has been, of course, this deal reached between the two aisles of the US Congress, whereby effectively they agreed to suspend the ceiling itself until 2025, so after the election of the new president. So make sure that this discussion, let's call it that way, is more a battle, a fight between the two sides, doesn't impact the presidential election and it doesn't become purely political. So it's kind of a compromise solution just to kick the can down the road. At the same time, we had the non-farm payrolls, the typical figure that all market participants look at the first Friday of the month. It was an astonishingly high figure for this May cycle, 339,000 increase in jobs in the US. And again, in the past, all these would have been more than enough to set the tone and the sentiment of markets. But these days, with so much geopolitics in play, in fact, there are way other things that preoccupy investors' minds.
Yeah. And between these sort of macro financial conditions, you also had the first the OPEC Plus summit happen recently, with interesting decisions taken by Saudi Arabia. What were those about?
So traditionally, the transmission mechanism, let's call it that way, between geopolitics and financial markets has been growth in oil prices. So geopolitics gets complicated, oil prices go up, hence you have a sort of stagflationary negative supply shock in which you have higher inflation and lower growth. Going forward, that would be the typical transmission mechanism. And in this case, we might have something along those lines. So there was an OPEC Plus meeting trying to agree on a production cut. There were lots of countries resisting that, considering that the cycle is already quite soft in many parts of the world. Germany was in its second consecutive quarter of negative growth, so technically a recession. Saudi Arabia pushed on and decided to implement a production cap as of July.
Right. And in Europe at the end of last week, there's a meeting of the European political community in Moldova. Who does this meeting gather and what was on the agenda?
Yeah, that's a relatively new gathering of EU member states, all of them, 27 plus the president of the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament, and the heads of states of government of 18 more countries in Europe that are not EU members, including the UK that now belongs to this category. More importantly, you had countries that are clearly the center stage at this stage, such as Ukraine being invited. But is the significance of the place that was chosen that it deserves some attention, because Moldova is not just any other country. It's a country at the center of attention at the moment because it does border with Ukraine. One of its regions, Transnistria, is already under Russian occupation, let's call it that way, or control. So they fear that they might be following the same fate of Ukraine. And in fact, that's attached to Ukraine. And we discussed in the past how, in an hypothetical, desirable victory by Putin, the entire south part of the country would go under the Russian control up to Odessa and then Transnistria, so just to unify all that more Russian-speaking part of the country under Russian control. It's hard to get there at this stage, given the resistance of the Ukrainians, but it was clear the message that the EU countries wanted to give is that no worries, if something really threatens you, we are here to help you, and therefore the presence at this EPC meeting of countries such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, it was also very important because these are the countries more under the Russian threat at the moment.
Right. I mean, one really important member not invited to this meeting was Turkey. That's, obviously has applied for EU membership several years ago, and has, been in the headlines recently, with President Erdogan beginning his third term in office. How's Turkey doing post election season?
Yeah, it's quite strange that Turkey was not invited. After all, it's again a EU candidate for years, and is the gateway between Asia, Middle East, and Europe. So it seems kind of an important country to have on the screen. Anyway, it wasn't there, but lots of things are happening in Turkey, as you know. Erdogan has been re-elected and has chosen a new finance minister. Actually, is somebody that we have known for quite a few years. It's Mehmet Şimşek, who used to be finance minister and deputy prime minister until 2018, when he was substituted by Erdogan's son-in-law, Al-Bayrak. That didn't cover himself in glory, I would say. The appointment of Şimşek signals potentially that Erdogan wants to pursue a more orthodox economic policy compared to what he has done in the last few years, the so-called Erdoganics that actually has flashed the economy. So the hope is that President of Şimşek will calm markets and will mark the return of more sensible economic policies.
Right. And if we gaze our eyes towards Asia, there's a very close call between the US and China, which happened in parallel to the Shangri-La dialogue. What was discussed here?
Yeah, I mean, we had lots of tensions in Southeast Asia directly between US and China. Recently, US frigates crossed paths with the Chinese warship, and it was almost a collision in what has been described as an unsafe maritime interaction. Clearly, it was a provocation from either side in showing that, in particular, I would say by the Chinese, because these were international waters, but the Chinese clearly wanted to mark the fact that once you go in the Taiwan Strait, you will have to deal with the Chinese surveillance, I would say, and control of the area, whether these are international or non-international waters. And similar episodes also happened in the skies, where planes and drones came to very close contact, almost close contact, so near collision. So the risk is that some of these provocations will end up in proper incident, and then de-escalating from that would be hard. So tension is increasing in Southeast Asia, and clearly if something were to happen, you would see the immediate repercussions on financial markets and sentiment. So the entire point we are making is that in past macro-financial news were enough to move the market. Some of them, the transmission mechanisms such as oil price decision, are still at play, but nothing is compared to big macro and geopolitical events such as the election of a new president changing course, a big meeting of political leaders in Europe, or the risk of direct military confrontation between US and China. And so we need to continue to monitor these events as they occur over time.
Yeah, I like what you said about sort of transmission mechanisms, and increasingly it seems like the number of transmission mechanisms, the number of choke points that translate geopolitical risk to financial risk have only increased, in fact, exponentially. And therefore, the overall sort of position is far riskier than it was ever before. But thank you so much for your time and insight, Brunello.
Thank you very much. Until next time.